Good morning. My name is Fareed Khan. I'm the founder of Canadians United Against Hate. And this morning, I'm here today with my colleagues to call attention to the misery and suffering in Gaza, in which Canada is complicit this holiday season. A time that's supposed to be about peace and goodwill. This is the third Hanukkah and Christmas season where we've celebrated in comfort and peace here in Canada, as our Palestinian brothers and sisters have been victims of a genocide that is still ongoing. Before the first speakers present their remarks, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are speaking today from the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people in the National Capital Region, and the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and the Mississaugas of the Credit, covering the Toronto region and the western part of Lake Ontario under Treaties 3, 13, and 14. Our Indigenous brothers and sisters have been the custodians of this land from time immemorial, and we acknowledge the extreme privilege of being guests on their traditional lands. Joining me today via video are Hugh Doherty, co-chair of Canadians in Support for Refugees in Dire Need, Rabbi David Mivasair, representing Independent Jewish Voices, Dr. Aliya Khan, co-chair of Doctors for Humanity, Dr. Catherine Case, also co-chair of Doctors for Humanity, and Brianna Olson, Pitawanakwat, with the United for Peace Canadian Interfaith Coalition. I'd like to call on Mr. Doherty to begin his remarks, followed by Rabbi David Mivasair, then Dr. Khan, Dr. Clase, and then Ms. Pitawanakwat.
Good morning. Thank you, Bertie. My name is Hugh Doherty, and I am a co-chair of Canadians in Support of Refugees in Dire Need. Jews around the world should be free to celebrate Hanukkah about the reconsecration of their temple that had been desecrated without it being tainted by Israel's targeted bombing and desecration of multiple Christian churches and Muslim mosques in Gaza over the past few years. The Christians around the world celebrate and reflect on the birth of Jesus, born into a humble Jewish family. As Christians, we celebrate him as the Son of God, while Muslims revere him as a prophet, usually following the utterance of his name with peace be upon him. Suddenly after his birth, Christ's family had to flee to Egypt to escape the massacre of the innocents. The irony is not lost on us that 75 kilometers from Bethlehem, over 16,000 children have been killed in the past 2 years by Israel. Jesus and his family were refugees for many years. However, he returned. He spoke, and people listened. He taught, and people learned. Each day he walked this earth, he redefined what humanity was and set an example of what it could become. People around him changed. It has been over 2,000 years, and there are more than 115 million refugees in the world today. People do not want to become refugees. Canada has spoken against oppression in South Africa, taking in refugees from Vietnam, Poland, Syria, the Ukraine, etc. This is a source of pride for our nation, and rightfully so. However, countries considered Canada's allies seem to get a free pass for defying international law in courts, committing crimes against humanity. Israel has violated the terms of ceasefire hundreds of times over the span of weeks, shooting and bombing Palestinian citizens, including children, on a regular basis without reproach. We need to speak and others will listen, teach and others will learn. Each day we walk this earth, we must define what humanity is and what it can become. We must change the options open to oppressive regimes that are making people refugees inside and outside their own homelands. This is not about God. This is about us. It is about our culture. It is about our nation. It is about others. It is about how we define humanity, for all is lost. The Canadian government has to do a better job of representing humanity. Thank you.
Rabbi David.
Thank you. As the holiday season approaches its end, I stand before you brokenhearted and furious. For more than 800 days, the world has watched in real time as Israel has committed genocide in Gaza, killing over 75,000 Palestinians, including more than 21,000 children and 14,000 women. As a Jew, this shatters me. The Torah commands us 36 times, You shall not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. The Talmud teaches us that whoever destroys a single life destroys an entire world. And in the book of Deuteronomy, God commands justice. Justice you shall pursue. Yet Israel's actions, bombardment, starvement, deliberate blocking of tents, blankets, medicines, and winter aid, spit on these teachings. This is not a defense of Jews. It is the worship of power, a blasphemy against everything our faith stands for. And as a Canadian, I'm ashamed of our government's complicity in Israel's crimes. At this time of year, when Hanukkah reminds us of light overcoming darkness, hope triumphing over despair, what we see in Gaza is darkness crushing hope. And Canada's complicity in these crimes betrays every value we claim to hold: Jewish, Christian, Canadian, and human. We must, as Canadians, choose justice over cowardice. We must impose immediate sanctions and a full, real, two-way arms embargo on Israel. We must enforce the terms of the October ceasefire so that food, medicine, and critical humanitarian aid can reach the people of Gaza. And we in Canada must support boycott, divestment, and sanctions until the occupation ends and Palestinians' rights are restored. The souls of Gaza's children cry out. Our tradition demands we answer. Justice, justice, we must pursue now.
Thank you, Rabbi. Dr. Aliya?
She's just on mute.
Doctor, you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Aliya Khan, co-chair of Doctors for Humanity, and we are representing more than 3,000 Canadian physicians and healthcare workers across Canada. And we are asking our Canadian government to demand immediate entry of the thousands of trucks with food and aid and medical supplies waiting outside Gaza to enter Gaza. We are still seeing babies being starved and dying. We are still seeing children being killed by bombs, which is totally contravening and violating the ceasefire agreement. And we are still seeing people being flooded and having no shelter as their homes have been destroyed by Israel, and the tents that they were temporarily living in have been washed away by the floods. Israel is preventing entry of mobile homes and tents and building supplies to provide adequate shelter for the hundreds of thousands of people who have been displaced in Gaza. We are demanding that physicians and humanitarian aid workers, international monitors, and journalists be allowed to enter Gaza without any restriction. We have seen this past few days that a delegation of Canadian MPs, physicians, and humanitarian aid workers were denied entry into the West Bank, and this is unacceptable. We need to document the war crimes that are happening in Gaza. We need to provide aid to the people. We need to ensure that the local indigenous Palestinian people are not slaughtered in their own homes and starved to death by the Israeli army. And Canada has a legal and moral duty to join the international community and demand that the ceasefire agreement be upheld, and demand that adequate aid be provided to the people of Gaza, and that the bombing and the sniper attacks be stopped. There are thousands of Palestinian children in Israeli jails who are also being tortured and starved and are being killed in the jails. And we need to have access, humanitarian aid workers need to have access to these children and all of the other Palestinians who are being held in administrative detention. We are seeing the reports of prisoners speaking out and the rapes by dogs and animals is unacceptable. This is not what humanity demands of us. We need to speak out and we need to be united in ensuring that we are able to provide adequate aid and support to the people of Gaza and the West Bank. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Catherine.
Hello, I'm Catherine Clase. I'm co-chair of Doctors for Humanity. In Gaza, people are living in tents, some of which are standing in sewage-contaminated water. UNRWA has shelter for 1 million people ready at the border. It's not allowed in. People are actively dying because of these conditions. Israel's deliberate throttling of aid exacerbates the impact on civilians and on healthcare workers. I've talked to surgeons and nurses returned from Gaza who've worked in other conflicts. Never have they experienced the absence of supplies that they experience in Gaza. There's zero stock for antibiotics and surgical equipment, the lack of soap to wash hands, the lack of bleach to wash blood from the emergency room floor, the lack of anesthetic for cesarean sections and amputations. 1.6 million people, including 100,000 children and 37,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women, are anticipated to continue to suffer acute malnutrition between now and April. Israel has not allowed the promised number of food trucks to enter. At this time of year, we say we love others. During this holiday season, when many around the world celebrate peace and goodwill, with no end in sight. Canada, which has long positioned itself as a defender of human rights, has profoundly betrayed its solemn commitments by failing to uphold its obligations under international law, failing to uphold the numerous treaties and covenants it has signed to protect the weak, the oppressed, and the subjugated, choosing instead to maintain arms exports to Israel and failing to impose any meaningful sanctions on those responsible for these ongoing genocidal crimes. We ask our government to follow our precepts and commitments, to love kindness, and to seek justice. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Brianna.
Good morning. Anin Minigishgad. My name is Brianna Olson Pitawanakwat, and I'm a member of Wakwamacong Unceded First Nation, currently residing in Toronto. I'm a member of the United for Peace Canadian Interfaith Coalition, and I speak to you today as an Indigenous practitioner, a cultural practitioner who stands alongside many people of many faith backgrounds in standing for the rights of Palestinians. We all share, despite our different faith backgrounds, we all share a crisis in our collective sense of justice that is shared amongst all of us. We continue to question how we can see such vagrant harms on people go unaddressed and the scale of suffering, which is not being reflected in significant action in the country of Canada. I'd like to remind everyone, as a First Nations person and citizen of my nation, that the Assembly of First Nations, the largest Indigenous advocacy group in this country, represented by over 600 chiefs and 900,000 First Nation citizens, passed a resolution in April entitled Solidarity with Palestine and Palestinian Self-Determination. In this resolution, they explicitly named Canada's complicity in the ongoing violence and genocide in Gaza by not taking significant action domestically and internationally to stop the government of Israel's ongoing genocide on Palestinians and the illegal occupation of their lands. Within this resolution, they also mentioned that Canada must reckon with its own colonial history in order to do so, and that it must stand and alongside its affirmation of the United Nations direct Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, both here and in Palestine. The AFN, along with many of First Nations communities, as well as myself, recognize Palestinians as Indigenous people of their own land and that they have rights on those homelands, just as we do here. that they have rights to nutritious food, medical supplies, and housing, which is the first step. And then secondly, an end to the brutal warfare and displacement that they are constantly experiencing. I would like to finish with my role as a birth worker and the sacred responsibility that we have to bring children and life into this world, something that is shared by all of the faith backgrounds in our coalition. And I think that we as humanity and we as people here in Canada must step up to protect that sacredness of life. And that is the least that we can do this holiday season. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you, Brianna. And thank you to all the previous speakers for your powerful and urgent words. As we gather on this day, I feel both a profound sadness and a righteous anger at Canadian leaders and their refusal to uphold obligations under international law, particularly at this time of year. In these final days before Christmas, I ask you to picture an eight-month-old Palestinian baby, Rahaf Abu Jazar. She should have been safe in her mother's arms, wrapped in a warm blanket. Instead, earlier this month, she lay shivering in a flooded tent in Khan Yunis until her body grew cold and her heart stopped. She died of hypothermia. Why? Because Israel violated the ceasefire agreement. Over 730 violations in 2 months, and banned blankets, tents, and winter clothing from entering Gaza, materials that could have saved this baby's life. Another newborn, 33-day-old Taim al-Khawaja, died the same way in Shati camp last week. And 2-week-old Muhammad Abu al-Khair also perished from hypothermia in his family's flooded tent. These children are not mere statistics. They are precious, innocent lives, added to the thousands of Palestinians, babies, and infants slaughtered over 807 days of genocide by Israel. A June poll in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz found that 47% of Israeli Jews support the extermination of Palestinians in Gaza, meaning this genocide has social license from half of Israeli society. Leading Holocaust scholars, Jewish intellectuals, and every major human rights organization have called it genocide, a crime no less heinous than what the Nazis did to Jews. The only way that we can end this Israeli barbarity is to take action, for Canada to take action with other nations, end Canadian arms sales to Israel and stop purchasing arms from them, impose real, meaningful sanctions on the genocidal Israeli regime and its leaders, demand and enforce a true ceasefire that allows at least 600 trucks of humanitarian aid a day into Gaza. We must all stand up for the babies and mothers, the Palestinian families subjected to an evil on a scale not seen since World War II. Because if we don't, then how can we call ourselves human? Thank you.
And we'll take questions in the room.
Dylan Robertson with the Canadian Press. There's been developments over the past months, the release of the hostages. It seems like the situation in Gaza gets a lot less attention. I'm wondering if there's a disconnect that you see with the Canadian public in terms of their understanding of what's happening right now, in terms of the attention this is getting. Is there anything that you think the Canadian public might not be grasping right now?
I'd like to let somebody from the video feed respond to that, please.
Maybe go ahead, Catherine.
Catherine?
I can respond to that. When we are conducting vigils and trying to raise consciousness in the community, these are exactly the rebuttals that we experience from members of the community. People say the hostages have been released. People say there's a ceasefire. And so one of the reasons that we're speaking to the Canadian public today is to raise consciousness and help people to understand that things have not improved in Gaza in the way that they might think they have. The promised number of food trucks is not entering. The food insecurity is extreme and will continue for months, according to a report just a week old. We really need to put pressure on Israel now to to change its behavior, to uphold the ceasefire, to let the food trucks in, to let the humanitarian aid in, and to let journalists in so that we can, as a world, know what has been happening and what continues to happen. Thank you.
Dr. Aliya?
Yes, I agree with all the points that Dr. Clase made. I also want to emphasize that we need to allow building materials in because, as you mentioned, Fareed, these babies are freezing to death. Babies are being deprived of baby formula. This is so barbaric that we would deprive innocent babies and children of food and water. And this must end. But there is a media ban. There's like almost a media blackout. We have done press conferences and we have had very little media uptake. And we've seen that the media does not present the Palestinian suffering. And there is a double standard. We immediately recognize the suffering in other parts of the world, such as Ukraine, as we should. But there should be equal value for all human lives, whether they're Palestinian or Ukrainian or any part of the world. All lives are equally precious. All children and babies need to be equally valued. And the indigenous people are being slaughtered in their own homeland. And the comments that were made by Brianna are very valuable. We have our own teaching lesson from what happened in Canada. And we are seeing the same thing happen in Palestine, where the indigenous people are being slaughtered and their civilization is being destroyed and erased by Israel. And this should not be allowed to continue.
And I would like to add to that Israel cannot do this without Western complicity, certainly from the United States, but also from Canada, the UK, Germany, and other nations who have essentially stood silent. Canada has still not used the word genocide to describe what is happening in Gaza, and Canada, under former Prime Minister Trudeau, actually criticized the ICJ case that South Africa brought against Israel. How can Canada call itself a defender of international law, the international rules-based order, a defender of human rights, when it takes such positions? I mean, the hypocrisy is galling.
As a follow-up, I'm just trying to understand how the conditions have changed and not changed on the ground since this hostage, deal. I mean, it seems like the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is no longer running on the ground. Obviously, the needs are still extremely dire, but does anyone have a sense of how the material conditions have changed on the ground since this happened?
I believe Dr. Aliya or Dr. Catherine, I believe you have colleagues who've visited Gaza?
Yeah. Catherine, would you like to comment? You're muted, Catherine.
Yeah, I haven't spoken to anyone who's returned from Gaza in the last month, but we are all seeing the effects of the storm and the flooding of the tents, the water that has brought up sewage, the sanitation system that is destroyed. So we know that cold and wet and sewage contamination have been added to the problems that we were aware of before. The report on food insecurity is very recent, so that's a projection over the next 4 months for more than 1 million people, 1.6 million people, including 100,000 children, continuing to suffer acute malnutrition between now and April. And that's because the promised number of food trucks are not being allowed in. And the throttling of supplies, we continue to hear about that. When people enter Gaza or being considered for entry into Gaza, when healthcare workers go, one of the things that they're asked is, do you have life-saving medical? And the reason they'll ask that is that it can be removed. So we know even, at the micro level that humanitarian aid is not being allowed in. So the cruelty of this, the unusualness under it, the depravity of this set of actions that continues to deny people their most basic, fundamental human rights, for which Israel is responsible. Israel is responsible to provide this, to provide care for the people in the occupied territories. And Israel is failing, and Canada is failing to tell Israel that. Thank you.
I don't have anyone online. Unless you do have a question, please raise your hand now if there's more questions in the room.
I can just also add to Dr. Clase's comments that I have actually spoken to my colleagues who have returned from Gaza just in the past few weeks, and they have said that the bombing and the Israeli army attacks have continued in Gaza, and the lack of medical aid and adequate food and healthcare needs are still unmet. And so there really hasn't been much change on the ground. And it seems as if this ceasefire has only accomplished a removal of attention from the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And colleagues are also concerned about what's happening in the West Bank. The people in the West Bank are being slaughtered. They're being driven from their homes. And the Indigenous people, and we do not have access to.
Sorry, Mrs. Khan, could you just repeat the last 20 seconds?
We lost your audio.
Oh, I was just mentioning that in the West Bank, we need to have access to the West Bank by international monitors and journalists. And the people in the West Bank are also being slaughtered and driven from their homes and are subject to attacks by violent settlers. And there needs to be law and order and respect for human life in the West Bank and access to adequate food, because the same thing is happening in the West Bank.
And just in closing, since we're almost at the end, to any MPs who might see these remarks, as you sit at home, warm and comfortable, having your Christmas dinner, think about what's happening in the Holy Land, where the land where Jesus Christ was born has been destroyed. One of the oldest Christian communities in the world, in Gaza, is almost extinct. Think about that. And when you come back from your vacations to Parliament in January, think about taking the moral stand and making the right decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Since we have more time, I thought I would ask what's worked so far? What are any positive effects on the situation? I mean, obviously, it's not sufficient for what you guys are looking at, but I'm just wondering, over the course of the conflict, what have we seen that's demonstrated progress in terms of the humanitarian or human rights situation?
I can't see anything that's worked in Gaza or the West Bank, frankly. That's the only comment I'll make.
Yes, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. The situation has deteriorated. We have talked to returned healthcare workers, and the later they've been, like the more recently, the worse things have been. So I can't see any progress. So one thing that I want to say, though, is that as we do move forward and we try to make...
Sorry, Dr. Clase, if you could just repeat your last 10 seconds of... Sorry, the audio cut out.
Sorry. So I was saying we've talked to people who've returned from Gaza at different times, trips at different periods in this conflict. And the more recent the testimony, the more extreme the conditions, the more severe the malnutrition, the worse the humanitarian supplies. So we do not see progress. But if there is one thing that encourages us, one thing that we will need to build on, It is the resilience of the Palestinian people. We need to put Palestinian leaders in positions of authority and give them control over how we rebuild in every single aspect of the work, not just the humanitarian work, but the physical rebuilding, the rebuilding of schools and universities, the rebuilding of the sewage system, the rebuilding of fresh water. Everything that needs to be done needs to be led by Palestinians, and that is the resilience of Palestinians and the Palestinians, doctors who are still standing in hospitals providing that leadership. That gives me hope, and that is something to build on. But I do not want you to think that things are any better.
David, if you have any remarks, you can make them now before we finish. I guess not.
Dylan, do you have a short question?
Specifically, I'm wondering how you would describe the Carney government's approach to this issue versus his predecessor. I think we've seen some of the rhetoric shift. We saw the statehood. I'm just wondering how you would summarize the difference with Carney versus Trudeau.
Well, if I were a professor grading them on their work, Mr. Trudeau would have gotten an F, and Mr. Carney is a D-. The acknowledgement of Palestinian statehood was a positive step, but it was a conditional recognition, which other countries have not put conditions on that recognition. Mr. Carney has moved in the right direction, but he has to move much farther, because you can't go striding around the world talking about being a defender of human rights and the international rule of law and then not stand up for those rights and that law. We are a signatory to the Genocide Convention, and one of the terms of the Genocide Convention is that you prosecute those who commit genocide. And we've had Canadians travel to Israel during this genocide to sign up with the IDF, and they've come home and gone about their business after participating in a genocide. That is not what defending international rule of law is about. It's certainly not what defending Canadian law is about. When Canadians traveled to the Middle East to join ISIS, when they came back, they were arrested, charged, and tried. And the same needs to happen for these Canadians who've traveled to join the Israeli military as they've committed a genocide.
This is all the time we have for today. This concludes press conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, very much for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.